Hi everyone, welcome to Unit 10, which is our final unit in OFTI 1130. This video will give you an overview of what a formal report is, the steps for writing formal reports. We will also look at how to conduct research using primary and secondary sources. We will discuss how to cite your sources, which is extremely important when collecting and presenting data. We'll also look at how to visually display data, especially related to charts, tables, or using graphs. And then we'll also look at understanding report components, which you will use to create your final formal report, which is our final exam, quote unquote, in this class. So let's get started. You may be asking, okay, what is a formal report? And you should at this point have a very good understanding of what an informal report is, but we will expand on those ideas in this unit and strictly discuss formal reports. And a formal report is a document in which the writer analyzes findings, draws conclusions, and makes recommendations intended to solve a problem or a situation. So the steps for writing formal business reports include first, determining the purpose and the scope of your report, which is what you're going to spend Unit 10, Part 1 really looking at. What is the purpose of your research? What is the purpose of your writing? And the scope is referring to what is going to be discussed and perhaps what is not going to be discussed. Second, we have anticipate the needs of the audience. Third, decide on a work plan and appropriate research methods. Fourth, we'll conduct research using primary and secondary sources. Fifth, organizing, analyze, and draw conclusions. And then lastly, design graphics to clarify the report's message. So we will really focus on number 1 here this week, and then Unit 10, Part 2, will focus on 2 and 3, and possibly even dabbling into 4, which is actually conducting your research. Part of Unit 10 will be providing peer feedback and editing other students' formal business reports. So I just wanted to go over what we will review when editing our own, and then also when editing the reports for others. So we want to look at the format. Your book is an excellent resource for you, and really you should use the examples in Chapter 10 to help you design your report. But you look at the format, and really how is it constructed. Secondly, consistency. We want a report to be consistently written. We don't want to jump from informal writing style to formal writing style and then back to informal writing style. So really looking for consistency throughout the report. We'll also look at heading levels. Do they make sense? Should they be changed? How many levels should there be? Really looking at heading levels with a critical eye. Graphics. On the last slide, you notice that graphics is last. Designing those tables, charts, or graphs. The reason why they're last is because we need to know what data we have in order to illustrate the purpose of our message. So we want to critically analyze the graphics that the writer, or you, is using to display information. And then, of course, we'll look at mechanics. How is the report structured? Does the writer illustrate formal writing structure? Looking at sentences, looking at paragraphs, really digging deep into all of the writing strategies that we have looked at thus far. They do not go away. Even though we've moved from chapter 3 to chapter 4 to chapter 5 to chapter 6. Everything that we've covered in this class so far is going to come out in your formal report. And as I mentioned in the beginning, this formal report serves as our final exam. So what I will be looking at is, are the writing strategies that we've discussed in this class displayed in your report? So a red flag to me would be, using long lead-ins, using redundancies, not using commas in the proper place. So if you're writing and you think something's been covered in this class, you want to make sure that it is correct, because like I said, this does serve as our final exam. So once you determine the purpose of your report, the scope of the report, and analyze the needs and really identify your audience, we'll begin to collect data. And we'll collect data from both primary and secondary sources. So I'll illustrate some examples of each. Secondary sources are provided by other people. So another person has conducted the research. College of DuPage has a wonderful selection of online databases. Again, this would be research that someone else is conducting and you're kind of reporting on it. I highly recommend going to the library at least 2 to 3 times during this process. You can access the materials online from home, but definitely pay attention to the COD library and the online databases that they have related to your report topic. Print resources are also an excellent source, a secondary source. This could be books that have been written. It could also be newspapers, periodicals, which are also, a lot of those are electronic now. So again, these are secondary sources that you can use to find data that you're going to use in your report. You of course can use the internet, so using Google as a search engine. Here are just some tips as far as how you can use Google, the search terms that you can use to find information on your topic. On this slide, you will find some strategies for using OR. So you would, really include 2 sets of information. And then you can also use an asterisk as a wild card to find an unknown word. And then you can also say and, or not to really limit or expand your search. While you do conduct your research, you always want to evaluate web resources and their credibility. We don't want to include questionable research, questionable articles from the internet in our report. We want our report to be as true and as valid as possible. So just a few questions you can ask yourself. What is the date of the web article? If I'm talking about cell phones and choosing a phone to purchase, and I find an article from 2007, clearly that is out of date and not necessarily a credible source or even a current source that we would want to use. When was the website last updated? A great question. And really using your own knowledge, your own sense, is anything out of date? If I'm reading an article, I'm thinking, another product has come out since they're talking about this one in the article. Again, red flag, probably not the best resource. Some additional questions we want to consider: who publishes or sponsors the page? If you Google a term and you'll notice that the top results always say ad, and that means that article or that website has been sponsored. And so you have to ask yourself, well, why is it sponsored? Is it going to be biased in any way? So who publishes or sponsors the page? Who makes the author an authority? And is the contact information available? That may lead to some additional credibility if the contact information is available. We can also look at the content of the resource to help us evaluate the credibility. Is the purpose of the site to entertain, inform, persuade, or sell? Who is the intended audience of the website or the article? How does the content compare with content elsewhere? Additionally, we always want to look for accuracy. So do the facts seem reliable that's being presented? Do you find errors in spelling? Huge, huge. If you find spelling errors, grammar errors, sentence structure issues, huge red flag. Clearly this site is not credible, or the article is not credible, which goes back into the importance of professional writing. And can you detect bias? Can you tell that the writer is leaning one way or the other? Now, the difference between secondary resources, which is what we just went through, and conducting primary research is primary sources are provided by you, conducted by you. So you are the one going out and finding the data and analyzing it. So if you created a survey, for example, using SurveyMonkey, you're the one, again, creating the questions, collecting the data, and analyzing the data. Personal interviews, and then additionally, your own observations and experiments. Yes, primary research is required as part of this report. So you will have to determine, after identifying your purpose, what can I do, what information or what research can I do on my own to include in my report. Since we are gathering data from others, it's important to discuss how to properly document our information, really to avoid plagiarism. So to avoid plagiarism, you must give credit whenever you use the following: another person's ideas, opinions, examples, or theories, any facts, statistics, charts, and drawings that are not common knowledge. So if it is not common knowledge and you picked it up somewhere, that information needs to be cited. Another person's exact spoken words or written words, so a quotation, and paraphrases of another person's spoken or written words, again, needs to be documented. As I mentioned before, because we are gathering information from others, you will have a number of citations, and that is just fine. That is perfect. These reports will be run through SafeAssign. So if information is copied and pasted and not given credit, that it would be considered plagiarism. And I usually have at least, unfortunately, one student each semester that at the last minute throws their report together and takes information, copies and pastes it into the report, and I catch that. So this is really your opportunity to gather information and analyze that information, give credit to those who deserve it, and really draw your own conclusions. So this is kind of the fair warning. No copy and pasting. Make sure that you give credit to others, and a report without citations would obviously not meet the objectives of this assignment. So learn from others and give them credit. As you conduct your data and document your data, there are two documentation formats, which you are welcome to choose whichever one you're more comfortable with. They are very different, and your book is an excellent resource to use in determining MLA, which is Modern Language Association format, or APA, which is American Psychological Association format. I tend to use APA in the research and the papers reports that I've conducted, but again, it is your choice. You just want to make sure that you are following all of the guidelines for the format that you choose. If you recall, number 6 on our steps for preparing formal reports discussed visual aids and graphics. You know, I would work on conducting your data first, starting to compose your report before really focusing on those graphics, but you're going to know how you work best. And graphics fulfill the following functions. They clarify data, they create visual interest. If you're looking at a 15-page report, it's going to help to have some visual aids in there, maybe with color, and again, adding to your purpose. What is the purpose of your report? And using graphics and visual aids to help the audience understand your purpose. They can also be used to simplify complex data, maybe especially with numbers, and then making numerical data easy to understand, again, because it really simplifies complex data that would have a lot of numbers associated with that content. When creating our reports, we want to make sure that we are matching our graphic to our objective. So what is our objective and what graphic is going to best illustrate that objective? A table should be used to show data and values. A bar chart should be used to compare related items. A line chart should be used to demonstrate changes in data over time. A pie chart should be used to visualize a whole unit and the proportion of its components. A flow chart can be used to display a process or a procedure, and a photograph or map or illustration can be used to add authenticity, to spotlight a location, and to show examples. A formal report is much more complex than an informal report because there are multiple components. And the next few slides will go over what these components are. And we'll start off with looking at what's considered the front matter components, which will be a cover and a title page. We want to choose a professional binder or report cover if we were actually printing the report out. Since our reports would be electronic, you don't necessarily need to worry about a binder or a cover, but we most definitely will have a title page, which will include the name of the report. You want to think of a savvy name, something that would attract readers to your report. The receiver's name, which would potentially be me or your audience, and your audience may not be me. So that's why it's important to determine who our audience is and what their needs are, because that's who you will actually write the report to. The author's name, you, your title and organization, being a College of DuPage student, and the date that you are submitting the report. Additionally, as part of the front matter components, we will create a letter or a memo of transmittal. And within this document, we would, as the writer, announce the topic and explain who authorized the report. You'll maybe have to think kind of outside the box, maybe make up a few details in order to complete your letter of transmittal. But really, it's kind of announcing what the report is, and briefly describes the project, highlights any findings or conclusions or recommendation if the receiver is supportive, we would want to include these. And of course, we'll close with appreciation for the assignment, any follow-up action, acknowledgement of help from others, especially if you conducted a survey. You would maybe want to just say a mini thank you to those who participated in the survey, and offers of assistance in answering any questions related to the content of the report. While the table of contents is part of the front matter components, I highly recommend waiting until the end of your report to put this together. We all know page numbers can change as we add or delete data, so you do want to wait on the table of contents, but yes, it is required as part of the report. The table of contents will show the page number of each report heading and then a list of the illustrations. Include any tables, illustrations, or figures showing the title and page numbers, the title of those illustrations. We may place the list on the same page with the table of contents if space allows, but if your table of contents is too long, the list of illustrations would be on the following page. After the table of contents comes the executive summary. To prepare an executive summary, we want to begin with the purpose. And this kind of goes back to your purpose statement. The purpose of this report is to what? What is the purpose? And that's really what we're working on in Unit 10, Part 1. We want to include strategic words and sentences, prepare an outline with headings for the purpose, findings, conclusions, and recommendations. We also want to add appropriate content under each heading. After the executive summary, we will look at the body of the report, which will be the introduction, which describes events leading up to the problem or needs, explain the report topic and why it is important, clarify the scope and boundaries of the report, identify who commissioned the report, and again, you may want to make up in some way. Include any literature review, especially in academic or scientific reports. As a writer, you will need to determine if a literature review is appropriate. It may be and it may not, so that's going to be up to you to decide. And explain secondary and primary sources and define any key terms that are going to be associated with the report. Maybe you talk about technology trends often, or you're going to talk about technology trends often in your report. We want to make sure and identify what you as a writer mean by technology trends. We want to present our research findings or a solution to the initial problem, discuss, analyze, and interpret the findings in logical segments, use clear descriptive headings, and eventually, once our body is complete, we will get to the conclusion. And in the conclusion, we will explain what the findings mean in relation to your report. Additionally, we'll draw conclusions based on the findings, and you may even have a recommendation section, which you would provide recommendations to the audience. We want to make sure that we are striving for practical, feasible, and ethical recommendations. Just something to keep in mind as you are conducting research, because we're all going to kind of make assumptions and make recommendations as we're conducting the research, but of course striving for practical, feasible, and ethical recommendations. After we complete the introduction and the body, we then have the back matter components, which are kind of the mirror image of the front matter components, which include an appendix. This would include any incidental or supporting materials, not necessarily relevant to all readers. If you conducted a survey, include the survey that you had people complete. as I just mentioned, surveys. Some more examples would be copies of other reports, tables, large graphics, and maybe any correspondence that you had. Maybe that would even include a transcript of your interview. Also, as part of the back matter components, we will have our works cited page or our references. You'll determine which component you will have based on the format that you choose. So APA is references and MLA is works cited. Regardless of the style that you choose, all sources will be listed alphabetically. Simply copying and pasting the URL will not cut it. So I'm asking you to look in the book and determine, okay, if I have an author of an article and a date and a website, that's all the information that I have, how do I cite that source? And you'll have to determine what that looks like accordingly. So some tips for writing your formal report. The first one is allow sufficient time. In Unit 10, Part 2, I've put together a mock timeline for you to help you get started, to manage your time. Reports that are thrown together at the last minute, they just don't work. This project does take a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort, but it's a way of illustrating all of the writing strategies that you have learned throughout the semester, and that's why I do treat it like a final exam. I would much rather, as an instructor, give you an opportunity to show me what you've learned, how your writing has improved, than to take a 100-question multiple choice test. So please do allow enough time. We really are going to dive in to the report writing next week with Unit 10, Part 2. Part 1 is really just figuring out what do you want to focus on, what's the purpose, what's the scope, and then starting next Wednesday, that will begin your research. Who's your audience? What am I looking for? And really, your goal for the end of Unit 10, Part 2 is to be writing your report. We do want to finish collecting our data before we begin to write. So we want to have everything in front of us at your workstation, all of your data, before you sit down to write your report, which is going to require us to front load the data search. As you collect your data, maybe start working on an outline, which will help the flow of your report. And again, it's okay to change things around. Wherever you are working, wherever you work on most of your assignments, ask yourself, is this a proper writing environment, or do I need to take time to drive to COD and use the library? Do I need to go to the public library? This is going to take a lot of time and take a lot of effort, and you want to be in the best environment possible. So whatever you need to do to make that happen, I believe it will pay off in the long run. Use your computer features wisely. So that can even include the internet, using the databases provided by College of DuPage. You can use Word to create a reference or a works cited list. You can use Word to create a table of contents. You can use Word to create a table. So really use the features that are available for you as you need. I do recommend, writing rapidly and revising later. You're going to have a lot of information. You're going to have a lot of content that you're trying to put together, and you can always revise it later. So if you're on a roll and you've collected your data and you're really just writing, it's okay to just keep going, and then maybe stop, take a few hour break or take a day break, and then go back in and clean up what you need to. Additional tips include saving difficult sections until you have gained confidence in your content and your purpose of the report. Use verb tenses consistently, and so that's kind of going back to the editing or revising a formal report. We want to be consistent. So the survey showed, the respondents said, consistency. Generally avoid I and we. Really, you are not using first person pronouns. So you would say the researcher or the writer or the respondents. You're not going to say I and we. This is extremely formal. Please check your book for the difference between informal and formal writing style. Once you do finish your first draft, let it sit for a while. Your first draft will be due to the discussion board to receive feedback, so that'll give you a good chance to finish what you have, post your draft on the discussion board, and maybe walk away for a day or two and let others provide feedback, and then you'll sit back down and finalize anything that you need to. When you do sit back down and bring in feedback that's been provided by others, be sure to revise your report for clarity, coherence, and conciseness. Throughout this video, you've heard me mention the different parts. Unit 10 does have a part 1, 2, 3, and 4. There is a checklist or a to-do list for each part. Make sure that throughout this process you're staying on track. Don't check out and check back in a week later. Again, I can usually tell when that happens. See the discussion board. We will participate in, like I said, a peer review, and your purpose and scope will also be posted on the discussion board. There's some opportunities to engage with others for primary sources. So if you want the class to participate in a survey, you can post it in the primary source discussion board, and use me as a resource. I am here to help you determine what you'd like to talk about. I'm here to help you with the APA or MLA format. Please reach out, and I'm happy to help. So this is really a summary of the rest of the semester up until the final unit. So until then, I'll be answering any questions that you have. Best of luck.